At Thanksgiving, my father looked me in the eye and told me to go live in the streets. Everyone waited for me to break, but I smiled, because they did not know I earned $25 million last year. They also did not know my name was on a debt I never signed. 3 weeks later, when they showed up begging to talk, they did not find forgiveness. They found the cold, stamped, and undeniable truth. My name is Skyla Stone, and for the last decade of my life, I have perfected the art of becoming invisible while sitting in plain sight. I was 34 years old, sitting on the far edge of a mahogany dining table that cost more than my first car, surrounded by the people who shared my DNA, but none of my reality. It was Thanksgiving in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, a place where the lawns are manicured with military precision and the family secrets are buried just shallow enough to rot the grass. The dining room was a masterclass in performative happiness. My mother, Marianne, had outdone herself with the decor. There were tapered candles burning in silver holders, casting a flickering, golden light over the roasted turkey that sat like a sacrificial offering in the center of the table. The air smelled of sage, butter, and the distinct, cloying scent of expensive perfume mixed with unspoken judgment. Framed photographs lined the mantel behind my father's head, a gallery of triumphs. There was Brielle winning a beauty pageant, Brielle graduating from fashion school, Brielle cutting the ribbon on her first studio. There were no pictures of me. I had long ago accepted that in the Museum of the Stone Family Legacy, I was not even a footnote. I was a typo they were trying to ignore. I sat at the fringe, the seat usually reserved for the unexpected guest or the distant cousin, even though I was the eldest daughter. To my left was my Aunt Linda, who kept asking me if I was still single with the concern one usually reserves for a terminal diagnosis. To my right was an empty space where the air felt colder. At the head of the table sat my father, Richard Stone. He was a man who wore his authority like a suit of armor, stiff and impenetrable. He was carving the turkey with a surgical intensity, the silver knife slicing through the meat with a wet, decisive sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. The conversation had been navigating the safe harbors of weather and local sports, but I could feel the current shifting. Richard did not like safe harbors. He liked rough waters where he could prove he was the only captain capable of steering the ship. He set the carving knife down, wiped his hands on a linen napkin, and looked down the length of the table. His eyes bypassed the steaming sides of green bean casserole and candied yams, bypassed my mother, bypassed Brielle, and landed squarely on me. It was the look of a predator spotting a limp. "So, Skyla," he said, his voice booming enough to reach the living room where the football game was droning on. "We have not heard much from you lately. What are you doing with yourself these days? Still playing around with those computers?" The table went quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My mother, Marianne, immediately began smoothing the napkin in her lap, her fingers working the fabric with nervous energy. She did not look at me. She stared at the centerpiece, likely praying that I would not say anything to embarrass the family. In the Stone household, sin was forgivable, but embarrassment was a capital offense. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the ice hit my teeth. "I run a systems integration firm," I said quietly. "It keeps me busy." It was the truth, but it was a truth so diluted, it was almost a lie. I did not mention that my firm, LumenGrid Automation, had just revolutionized supply chain logistics for 3 Fortune 500 companies. I did not mention that my secondary venture, Pilot House Systems, had been acquired in a silent deal that reshaped my entire financial existence. To them, I was just Skyla, the one who tinkered, the one who did not fit the mold of Southern belle perfection. Richard chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Systems integration. That sounds like a fancy word for tech support." He looked around the table, inviting the others to join in his amusement. "I hope it pays the rent. You know, in this economy, you cannot just drift forever." I gripped my fork tighter, the metal biting into my palm. "I am doing fine. Dad," I said. Brielle, who was sitting to his right, swirled the Pinot Noir in her crystal glass. She looked radiant. I had to give her that. Her hair was a cascade of perfect blonde waves, her skin glowing with the kind of health that costs a fortune to maintain. She was the golden child, the one who had followed the script. She leaned forward, her bracelets jingling softly. "Oh, speaking of business, Daddy, did I tell you about the expansion?" she asked. Her voice sugary and bright. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was redirecting the spotlight to herself, but in doing so, she was casting a longer shadow over me. Richard's face softened instantly. "Tell us, sweetheart." The studio. Yes, Brielle beamed. "Brielle and Company Bridal is officially looking at a second location downtown. We are overwhelmed with orders. I mean, the demand for my custom lace designs is just insane. I might even need to hire a new manager just to handle the overflow." "That is my girl," Richard said, raising his glass. "See? That is what ambition looks like. Building something real, something you can touch, not just staring at screens all day." Marianne finally looked up, smiling at Brielle with a mixture of relief and pride. "We are so proud of you. Brielle, you have such a gift." The praise washed over the table, warm and excluding. I sat there, cutting a piece of turkey into smaller and smaller squares, analyzing the geometry of the meat, so I would not have to look at their faces. I knew the truth about Brielle's studio, because I knew how to read market signals, and I knew the bridal industry in Charlotte was oversaturated. I had seen the reviews, online complaints about delayed shipments and rising costs, but here, at this table, facts did not matter. Only the narrative mattered, and the narrative was that Brielle was the star, and I was the black hole. Then, Richard turned back to me. The contrast was deliberate. He wanted everyone, Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, the cousins, to see the difference. "You could learn a thing or two from your sister." "Skyla," he said. He picked up his wine glass but did not drink. He just held it, swirling the red liquid. "You are 34 years old. By your age, I had a mortgage, 2 kids, and a partnership in the firm. You are renting a condo. You have no husband, and you are vague about your job. It worries your mother." Marianne did not confirm or deny this. She just took a small bite of stuffing, her eyes fixed on her plate. "I am happy, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "My life is different, but it works for me." "Different," Richard scoffed. "Different is what people say when they are failing but do not want to admit it. Look, I am going to be honest with you because I am your father. We are tired of wondering if you are going to call us asking for money." I felt a cold flush of heat rise up my neck. "I have never asked you for money." I said, "Not once. Not since I was 18. Not yet," Richard corrected. "But it is coming. I can smell it. You do not have a foundation. Skyla, you are floating, and people who float eventually sink." The room was deadly silent now. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds of my humiliation. I tried to disengage. "I think we should just enjoy the dinner," I said. "No, I think we should be clear," Richard said, his voice rising. He leaned forward, his face hardening into a mask of disdain. "I have carried this family on my back for 40 years. I built a reputation. Brielle is adding to that reputation. You are a question mark, and I do not like question marks." He paused, letting the tension stretch until it was nearly unbearable. Then he delivered the line he had clearly been rehearsing in his head all afternoon. "If you cannot take care of yourself, Skyla, then do not come crying to us. If you fail, you go live in the streets, because I am done supporting dead weight." The words hung in the air, violent and absolute. Go live in the streets. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had once checked under my bed for monsters, now looking at me as if I were the monster. I looked at Marianne, waiting for her to intervene, to say, "Richard, that is enough," but she just reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. She was choosing her peace over my dignity. I looked at Brielle, and I saw a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her perfectly lined lips. She was enjoying this. She was winning. And for Brielle, winning was the only thing that made a meal taste good. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears, the shouting, The defensive scene that would prove I was exactly the emotional mess they claimed I was. They wanted a reaction so they could say, "See, she is unstable." I took a deep breath. I inhaled the scent of sage and hypocrisy, and then I exhaled. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply placed my fork and knife parallel on my plate, the universal signal that I was finished. I picked up my linen napkin, folded it neatly into a square, and placed it to the left of my setting. "Thank you for the meal, Marianne," I said. The turkey was excellent. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made Aunt Linda flinch. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I looked Richard dead in the eye. He looked surprised, perhaps disappointed that I had not given him the fight he wanted. "I will see myself out," I said. I turned and walked away. I walked past the grandfather clock, past the gallery of Brielle's achievements, past the front door with its festive wreath. I grabbed my coat from the rack and stepped out into the biting November air. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside their warm, delusional bubble. My car was parked at the end of the driveway, a black sedan that looked modest enough to blend in but had an engine built for performance much like me. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold against my back. I sat there for a moment in the silence, listening to the ringing in my ears. "Go live in the streets." The phrase played on a loop in my mind. It was laughable. It was absurd. But it still hurt. Like a paper cut doused in lemon juice. It wasn't the financial threat that stung. I had enough liquidity to buy this entire neighborhood if I wanted to. It was the total, absolute lack of faith. It was the realization that to them, I was worthless unless I was reflected in their mirror. I pulled my phone out of my purse. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. There were 3 notifications from my chief financial officer and a weekly summary report from the automated dashboard of LumenGrid. I unlocked the phone and opened the banking app that I kept hidden in a folder labeled Utilities. The numbers stared back at me, crisp and comforting. Net income. Year to date, $25,480,000. I scrolled down. My liquid assets alone were sitting at 8 figures. The acquisition of Pilot House Systems had closed 2 weeks ago, depositing a lump sum that most people would need 10 lifetimes to earn. I was not just solvent. I was wealthy in a way my father could not even comprehend with his local law practice and his country club memberships. I tapped on the Team Chat app. A message from my lead developer popped up. "Skyla. The beta test for the new logistics algorithm is at 99% efficiency. We are ready to launch on Monday." I typed back a quick reply. "Excellent work. Proceed." I put the phone down on the passenger seat. Through the windshield, I could see the glow of the dining room window. I could see the silhouettes of my family. Still eating, still talking. They were probably dissecting my exit right now. Richard was probably saying, "See?" She ran away. She cannot handle the truth. Brielle was probably pouring another glass of wine, relieved that the competition had removed itself from the arena. They had no idea. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. For years, I had been bringing my achievements to their doorstep like a cat bringing home a dead mouse, hoping for a pat on the head. I had wanted them to see me. I had wanted them to be proud. But tonight, as the engine purred to life, I realized that I was done. The transaction was closed. I do not need them to understand anymore. I whispered to the empty car. I shifted the gear into reverse, ready to back out of their driveway and out of their lives. I was going to go back to my high-rise condo in the city, pour myself a glass of scotch that cost more than their Thanksgiving turkey, and continue building my empire. I was free, or so I thought. What I did not know, as I drove away from that house with its perfect lawn and its poisoned dinner table, was that the severance package was not going to be that clean. I did not know that while I was checking my $25 million balance, a file was sitting in a drawer in my father's study with my name on it. I did not know that 3 weeks ago. A pen had moved across a piece of paper, tracing the loops and curves of a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. They had told me to go live in the streets. It was a cruel insult. a throwaway line meant to assert dominance, but they had already taken steps to make it a reality. They had leveraged my name against a debt that was rotting from the inside out. They thought I was a helpless little girl who would come crawling back when the world got too hard. They had no idea that they had just declared war on a woman who had the ammunition to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I turned onto the main road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I turned up the radio to drown out the memory of my father's voice. Unaware that the real noise was just beginning, the countdown had started. Not for me, but for them. And unlike their insults, the coming storm was going to be documented, notarized, and utterly irreversible. The drive from my parents' house to my condo in downtown Charlotte usually took 40 minutes, but tonight, it felt like I was traversing a century of history. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of concrete illuminated by the sterile glow of streetlights. But my mind was not on the road. It was traveling back to the source of the rot, back to the rooms and hallways where the script for tonight's disaster had been written decades ago. To understand why my father felt comfortable telling me to live in the streets, you have to understand the architecture of the Stone family. It was not built on love, it was built on image. From the time I was old enough to hold a screwdriver, I knew I was a structural defect in their carefully designed blueprint. I was 10 years old when the divide became a canyon. While other girls in my 4th grade class were asking for dolls or pony rides, I was obsessed with the way things worked. I remember dragging an old, discarded toaster out of the neighbor's trash can and bringing it into our garage. I spent 3 hours dismantling it, categorizing the screws, cleaning the heating elements, and marveling at the simple logic of the circuitry. I was covered in grease and soot, my fingernails black with grime, but I felt a profound sense of peace. The machine made sense. If a wire was connected, it worked. If it was broken, you fixed it. My father found me there. I expected him to be impressed. I wanted to show him that I had fixed the spring mechanism. Instead, he looked at me with a mixture of confusion and distaste that I would come to know better than my own reflection. "Skyla," he had said, his voice tight. "Go inside and wash yourself. You look like a mechanic. That is not how a stone presents herself to the world." He did not ask if I had fixed it. He did not care about the function. He only cared about the aesthetic. That was the beginning. While I was burying myself in textbooks on coding languages and physics, my younger sister, Brielle, was mastering the art of being delightful. Brielle was the child they had ordered from the catalog. She was blonde, bubbly, and instinctively understood that her job was to reflect our parents' vanity back at them. When she twirled in a new dress, my mother, Marianne, would clap her hands together and beam. When she struggled with basic math, my father would laugh and say it was charming because she would never need to worry about numbers with a husband to look after her. I, on the other hand, was the problem that needed solving. I was the dark cloud on their sunny horizon. The toxicity in our house was not loud. It was not the kind of abuse you see in movies with thrown plates and screaming matches. It was quieter, more insidious. It was a slow suffocation. Marianne was the master of the silent critique. She never raised her voice. She simply used silence as a weapon. If I came downstairs wearing a t-shirt that she deemed unladylike, she would not yell. She would just sigh, a long, weary exhale, and look at my father with eyes that said, "See what I have to deal with." Then she would refuse to make eye contact with me for the rest of the morning. I learned quickly that in the Stone household, affection was a currency, and I was perpetually bankrupt. By the time I was in high school, the roles were cast in stone. Brielle was the golden child, the one destined to marry well and keep the family name polished in the social circles of our church and country club. I was the scapegoat, the eccentric, the one who was tolerated but never celebrated. I remember the day I won the state coding championship. I was 16. I had spent months staying up until 2 a.m, writing lines of code until my eyes burned, building a program that optimized traffic light patterns. I brought the trophy home, a heavy plastic obelisk with gold lettering. I placed it on the kitchen island, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the validation I was starving for. Richard walked in, glanced at the trophy, and then looked at the mail in his hand. "That is nice, Skyla," he said, without stopping. "Make sure you move it before dinner. Your mother needs the counter space for the flower arrangements. The pastor is coming over tonight." That was it. "That is nice. Move it." 10 minutes later, Brielle rushed in, breathless, holding a shopping bag. She had found the perfect sash for her choir robe. Marianne and Richard stopped everything. They gathered around her, touching the fabric, discussing the shade of blue, praising her eye for color. They spent 20 minutes celebrating a piece of fabric while my state championship trophy sat like a paperweight, invisible and obstructing the view. It was in that moment, standing in the shadow of their adoration for Brielle, that I realized the truth. They did not ignore me because I was failing. They ignored me because my success did not serve their narrative. They needed me to be the failure. Every family system like ours needs a baseline, a contrast, for Brielle to be the shining star. Someone had to be the dark night sky, for Richard to be the benevolent patriarch. Someone had to be the wayward child he was constantly trying to save. If I was successful, if I was brilliant, if I was independent, then their pity was misplaced, and they loved their pity. They wore it like a badge of honor. "Oh, poor Skyla. She is just so lost," they would tell the neighbors, shaking their heads. "We pray for her every day." So, I stopped trying to make them see me. I started building a life they could not touch. I left home the day after I turned 18. I did not ask for their help, and they did not offer it. While they paid for Brielle's fully furnished apartment near her fashion design school, complete with a monthly allowance that exceeded most people's salaries, I moved into a basement studio in a questionable part of town. The walls smelled of damp earth, and the radiator clanked like a dying engine. But it was mine. I worked the graveyard shift at a data center, monitoring servers while the rest of the city slept. I attended university on a full academic scholarship that I had applied for without my parents' knowledge. When I told them I got a full ride, Richard had frowned and asked if it was a vocational school. He could not conceive that his difficult daughter was outperforming his expectations. Those years were brutal, but they forged me. I learned the value of $1 when I had to choose between buying textbooks or buying heat. I learned how to navigate corporate politics by watching the way managers took credit for my code. I learned that the only person who was ever going to save Skyla Stone was Skyla Stone. But the most painful part was not the poverty or the exhaustion. It was the visits home. I would return for holidays, driven by that biological imperative that makes us seek out our tribe, even when the tribe is poisonous. And every time I went back, I saw the mechanism at work. Brielle would be there, glowing with her latest subsidized success. She would talk about her business, which was essentially a hobby funded by Richard's bank account. She would complain about how hard it was to find good help, or how stressful it was to plan a gala. And I would sit there, exhausted from working 80-hour weeks building my own legitimate company, and I would say nothing. When I tried to share my life, it was filtered through their lens of disappointment. I was promoted to senior systems architect. I told them once over Easter brunch. Richard had just nodded, chewing his ham. "That is with computers, right? Just make sure you are not staring at screens until your eyes go bad. No man wants a wife who looks like a librarian," Marianne had added. "Brielle is dating a lovely young man from the bank. Perhaps he has a friend for you. Although, you might want to do something about your hair first. It is so severe. They reduced my career, my passion, and my intellect to a barrier preventing me from finding a husband. They could not celebrate me because I was winning a race they did not believe in. Gradually, I learned to play the part they wrote for me. It was easier. It caused less friction. If I showed up looking tired, they were satisfied. If I was vague about my money, they assumed I was struggling, and that made them feel secure. They needed to believe I was one step away from disaster so they could feel superior. Poor Skyla. She tries, but she just does not have the knack for life. I let them have that. I let them believe I was scraping by. I let them believe my little computer job was barely keeping the lights on. It was a protective camouflage. If they thought I had nothing, they would ask for nothing, or so I thought. But as I drove through the dark, putting miles between me and that Thanksgiving table. I realized I had made a critical error in my calculation. I thought that by playing the failure, I was protecting myself. I thought that by appearing weak, I was making myself of no value to them. I was wrong. In a family like mine, weakness is not a shield. It is an invitation. By letting them believe I was financially illiterate and desperate, I had made myself the perfect victim. They did not see a daughter who needed support. They saw a name they could use. They saw a credit score they could exploit because, in their minds, I was too disorganized to notice, too beaten down to fight back. They assumed that because I had accepted their emotional scraps for 30 years, I would accept their financial abuse too. They thought the Skyla who sat silently at the edge of the table was the only Skyla that existed. They had forgotten the 10-year-old girl in the garage who knew how to take things apart. They had forgotten the teenager who wrote code in the dark. They had forgotten the woman who built 2 companies from the ground up while they were busy patting themselves on the back for being normal. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, pulling me out of my memories. It was an automated alert from my home security system, welcoming me back to my sanctuary. I took the exit toward the city center, the skyline rising up like a fortress of glass and steel. My building was the tallest one in the district, a testament to everything I had achieved without their help, without their approval, and without their money. I was done playing the role of the disappointment. I was done being the backdrop for Brielle's shine. Richard's voice echoed in my head one last time. Go live in the streets. I gripped the steering wheel, my jaw setting into a hard line. I was not going to the streets. I was going to war. But first, I needed to know exactly what they had done. I needed to see the wires they had crossed. And just like that toaster in the garage 24 years ago, I was going to dismantle their lies, screw by screw, until the whole dysfunction was laid bare on the floor. The sad little girl who wanted her daddy to be proud was gone. The CEO was clocking in, and she was not in the business of forgiveness. The view from the 34th floor of my uptown Charlotte condo was a panorama of steel, glass, and ambition. From here, the city looked like a circuit board, a grid of illuminated pathways and energy nodes that made perfect, logical sense. It was quiet up here, the kind of expensive silence that is filtered through triple-paned glass and central air conditioning systems designed to scrub the atmosphere of anything pedestrian. It was Sunday morning, 3 days after the Thanksgiving disaster. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a mug of black coffee in my hand, looking down at the ant-sized cars crawling along the streets below. My father's voice was still a phantom echo in my head. Go live in the streets, but up here, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my competence, his words lost their power. They became data noise, irrelevant outliers in a dataset that trended overwhelmingly toward success. My apartment was not just a living space, it was a command center. To my left, in the open-concept office area, a bank of 4 monitors was currently displaying the live metrics of my empire. Most people thought I fixed computers. The reality was that I owned LumenGrid Automation, a company that designed the nervous systems for smart warehouses. And then there was Pilot House Systems, my secondary venture focused on maritime logistics software. The family thought I was scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. They did not know about the strategic acquisition I had closed late last year. I had sold a proprietary piece of predictive code to a global shipping conglomerate. The net income from that single transaction, after taxes and fees, was $25 million. $25 million. I remembered the day the wire transfer hit. I had stared at the screen for an hour, watching the number sit there, solid and unmoving. I had not bought a Ferrari. I had not posted it on Instagram. I had simply paid off my condo, diversified the portfolio into aggressive index funds and municipal bonds, and gone back to work. Wealth, for me, was not about flash. It was about insulation. It was the wall that kept the world from touching me. But the wall, I was beginning to realize, had a breach. My phone, sitting on the marble kitchen island, buzzed. It was a single vibration, short and sharp. I walked over and picked it up. The name on the screen was Avery Lawson. Avery was my cousin on my mother's side, and she was the only person in the extended family tree who did not treat me like a contagious disease. Avery was a nurse, practical and grounded, and she had long ago grown tired of the Stone family theater. She usually only texted me to send memes or check if I was still alive after holiday gatherings. This message was different. It was a block of text, followed by a rolling eyes emoji. Just left the second service at Grace Community Church. You are the sermon topic again. Aunt Marianne is asking the prayer circle to pray for your housing situation. She told Mrs. Gable that you are essentially homeless and sleeping on a friend's couch. She actually cried. Skyla. Real tears. I read the message twice. I felt a cold, dry laugh bubble up in my chest. Homeless. Sleeping on a couch. It was masterful, in a twisted way. My father had told me to go live in the streets on Thursday, and by Sunday, my mother had turned that threat into a public fact. They were controlling the narrative. By painting me as destitute, they were validating Richard's harshness. If I was truly failing, then his tough love was justified. It made him the concerned patriarch dealing with a delinquent child, rather than a bully kicking his daughter when she was down. I typed back, "Let them pray. Maybe it will help my credit score." I hit send, intending to put the phone down and go for a run, but the 3 dots of a reply appeared immediately. Avery was not done. "There is more," she wrote, "and you are not going to like it. I heard Brielle talking to Caleb in the parking lot. They thought I was already in my car." My stomach tightened. Caleb Vance was Brielle's fiancé, a decent man who always looked slightly bewildered by the intensity of my family. "What did they say?" I asked. Avery's reply took a minute to come through, as if she was hesitating to type the words. "Brielle is in trouble. Skyla, real trouble. The studio is bleeding cash." She was crying to Caleb that 3 of her seamstresses quit because paychecks bounced last week. She said the landlord for the new expansion space is threatening legal action for 2 months of unpaid rent. She kept saying, "Mom said she would handle it. Mom said she would find a way." I set the coffee mug down. The ceramic made a hard clack against the marble. The pieces of the puzzle began to click together with a terrifying precision. Brielle was failing. The Golden Child's empire was a house of cards, and the wind was picking up. The expansion she had bragged about at Thanksgiving was not a sign of growth. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass to generate cash flow to cover old debts. She was drowning, and in the Stone family, Brielle was not allowed to drown. Brielle was the trophy. If she sank, the family's reputation sank with her. Richard and Marianne would never allow that. They would do anything to keep the facade intact. They would sell the furniture. They would mortgage the house. They would find a way. Mom said she would handle it. My mind raced back to Thanksgiving, the tension, the specific way Richard had attacked me. He hadn't just called me a failure. He had aggressively framed me as one. If you cannot take care of yourself, go live in the streets. Why be so aggressive? Why now? Unless they needed to establish a baseline of incompetence for me, unless they needed everyone, the church, the relatives, the community, to believe that Skyla Stone was a financial train wreck. If Skyla is a known failure, then Skyla has no credibility. If Skyla has no credibility, then if something goes wrong with Money Well, it must be Skyla's fault. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down my spine. I was not just the black sheep anymore. I was the scapegoat. And they were fattening me up for the slaughter. I walked into my home office. The room was sparse, clinical. I went to the wall behind my desk and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner of a hidden wall safe. The heavy steel door clicked open with a hiss. Inside were my corporate charters, my deeds, and my personal identification documents. I did not keep much cash here, just hard drives and paper trails. I pulled out a folder labeled Personal Archive. I needed to see something. I flipped through the pages until I found an old lease agreement from 5 years ago, one of the few times I had needed a physical signature rather than a digital one. I stared at my own name, Skyla J. Stone. I had a distinct signature. The S was sharp, angular, almost like a lightning bolt. They looped down with a heavy tail. It was the signature of someone who did not like to waste time. I closed my eyes and tried to visualize my credit report. I monitored it. Of course, I had alerts set up for any new inquiries. But my family knew things about me that the credit bureaus did not. They knew my social security number. They knew my mother's maiden name. They knew the name of my first pet. They had the keys to my identity, stored in the filing cabinets of my childhood home. Avery's text flashed in my mind again. Mom said she would find a way. If Brielle needed money fast, and Richard was tapped out, which I suspected he was, given the economy and his penchant for living above his means, where would they get it? They couldn't get a loan. Brielle's credit was likely shot if she was bouncing payroll checks. Richard would not risk his own credit rating. He was too proud. But Skyla was invisible. Skyla was vague about her job. Skyla was struggling. If a loan appeared in Skyla's name, or if Skyla co-signed a loan, and then that loan went bad, well, that just fit the narrative, didn't it? Poor Skyla. She tried to help, but she messed it up again. They were using me as a shield. I could feel it. It was an intuition honed by years of writing code spotting the bug before it crashed the system. The narrative at church was the patch code, preparing the user base for the glitch. They are destroying my reputation to cover their theft. I whispered to the empty room. I did not feel angry. Anger is a hot, messy emotion, and I had no use for it right now. What I felt was a cold, crystalline clarity. I felt the way a surgeon feels when they identify the tumor. It was ugly, it was dangerous, and it had to be cut out. I grabbed my phone and texted Avery back. Do not say a word to them. Act like you know nothing. Just keep your ears open. Then I sat down in my ergonomic chair and unlocked my workstation. I did not log into my work servers. Instead, I opened a new, encrypted browser window. I typed in the web address for the state's Uniform Commercial Code database. If there were liens, if there were secured loans taken out against assets that involved me, there might be a trace. I hesitated for a second, my finger hovering over the enter key. Part of me, the small, stupid part that still wanted a mom and dad, hoped I was wrong. I hoped they were just mean, not criminal. I hoped the homeless rumors were just petty gossip to make themselves feel better. Because if I pressed this button, and if I found what I thought I was going to find, there was no going back. This would not be a family squabble. This would be a felony. But then I remembered Brielle's smirk. I remembered Marianne looking at the tablecloth while Richard told me to die in the gutter. I pressed enter. The search would take time to be comprehensive. I needed to pull full credit reports from all 3 bureaus, which would take 24 hours to update fully with the specific level of detail I needed. I needed to request physical copies of recent inquiries, but the decision was made. I was not going to call them. I was not going to drive over there and scream. How dare you? That is what the old Skyla would have done. That is what the emotional, unstable daughter would do, and that would only help them. It would give them more fuel. See, she is hysterical. No, I would be silent. I would be a ghost. I closed the safe and spun the dial. I walked back to the window. The city below was waking up. People were going to brunch. Families were walking in the park. My family thought they were playing a game of social manipulation. They thought they could sacrifice a pawn to save the queen. They did not know that the pawn had already crossed the board. The pawn was a queen now, too. And she had $25 million, a team of lawyers, and a heart that had finally turned to stone. I took a sip of my cold coffee. It was bitter, just the way I liked it. Proceed, I said to myself. The storm was not coming. I was the storm, and I was just waiting for the wind to change direction before I made landfall. Monday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a blade. The sky over Charlotte was a sheet of slate gray. Pressing down against the glass walls of my office, I had spent the weekend running background processes on my emotions, compartmentalizing the hurt and bringing the logic to the forefront. I was seated at my desk at 8 o'clock sharp, my dual monitors glowing with the familiar comfort of code repositories and market analytics. The chaos of Thanksgiving felt distant, like a bad dream I had already analyzed and dismissed. Then, at 9:10, my email inbox pinged. It was not a notification from my development team. It was not a client update. It was a message flagged with high-priority red tags, sitting at the top of the list like a festering wound. Sender Hawthorne and Pierce Legal Group. Subject verification required. Guarantor authorization, urgent file number 89204. I stared at the screen. The name of the law firm sounded vaguely familiar. The kind of mid-tier, aggressive firm that handled debt collection and contract disputes. I hovered my mouse over the subject line. My first instinct was that it was a phishing scam, some sophisticated attempt to get me to click a malicious link, but the domain name was legitimate. I had an automated security protocol that filtered out 99% of spam. This had passed through. I clicked open. The body of the email was brief, formal, and terrifyingly direct. Dear Ms. Stone, we are attempting to contact you regarding the commercial loan agreement dated October 14th, 2022, for which you are listed as the primary guarantor. The principal borrower, Brielle & Co. Bridal, has missed 3 consecutive payment cycles and is now approaching default status. As the guarantor, your assets are subject to immediate lien initiation if the outstanding balance is not reconciled within 10 business days. Please review the attached execution copy and contact us immediately. The room suddenly felt very cold. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that sounded like a warning siren. I did not panic. Panic is for people who do not have a plan. Instead, I felt a heavy, leaden weight settle in my stomach. I downloaded the attachment. It was a 20-page PDF, a scanned document with the heavy, dark grain of something that had been faxed or copied multiple times. I scrolled past the legalese, past the interest rate tables, past the indemnification clauses. I stopped at the summary page. Principal amount $620,000. Purpose of loan, commercial renovation and expansion of retail premises. Borrower, Brielle Stone. Guarantor, Skyla Stone. $620,000. I said the number out loud to the empty room. $620,000. It was a staggering sum for a bridal shop in a suburban strip mall. It was enough to buy a house. It was enough to ruin a life. I scrolled to the final page, the signature page, and there it was, my name, written in blue ink. I leaned in closer to the monitor, zooming in until the pixels began to blur. At a glance, to an untrained eye or a tired bank clerk, it looked like my signature. It had the sharp capital S. It had the loop on the Y. But to me, the owner of that hand, it was a grotesque forgery. The rhythm was wrong. When I sign my name, the K connects to the Y in a fluid, unbroken motion. On this document, there was a microscopic hesitation, a tiny break where the pen had lifted, as if the writer had paused to check a reference. The slant was too vertical. My natural handwriting leans forward, aggressive and rushing toward the right. This signature stood upright, cautious and deliberate. It was a tracing, or a practiced imitation. I looked at the date next to the signature, October 14th, 2022. They had done this over a year ago. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking. This was not a sudden mistake. This was not a desperate, last-minute decision made by a sister in trouble. This was premeditated. While I was building my companies, while I was visiting for Christmas and politely eating their ham, while I was buying them birthday gifts, my name was already sitting in a bank vault, attached to a ticking time bomb. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I dialed the number listed in the email signature. It rang twice. Hawthorne and Pierce, creditor services. A woman's voice answered. She sounded tired. The voice of someone who spends her day listening to excuses. This is Skyla Stone, I said. My voice was ice. I just received an email regarding file number 89204. There was the sound of typing on the other end. One moment. Ms. Stone? Yes, I see the file here. We have been trying to reach the borrower, but our calls are going to voicemail. We sent the notice to you as the guarantor because the loan is entering the acceleration phase. I am looking at the document right now. I said, I want to be very clear. I did not sign this. The typing stopped. There was a long silence on the line. It was a silence I suspect she had held 1,000 times before. "Ms. Stone," the woman said, her tone shifting from bored to patronizing. "The document is notarized. We have a copy of your driver's license on file. We have a board resolution from the borrower stating you were present at the signing. I do not care what you have," I said, cutting her off. "I was in San Francisco on October 14th, 2022, speaking at a tech conference. I can provide flight records, hotel receipts, and video footage of me on a stage 3,000 miles away from Charlotte. That signature is a forgery." The woman sighed. It was a heavy, weary sound. "Ma'am, if you are claiming fraud, that is a very serious accusation. You are listed as the guarantor. That means if the borrower does not pay, we come for your assets, your house, your car, your wages. My wages were not the issue. I could write a check for $620,000 right now and barely dent my portfolio, but that was not the point. The point was the violation. I am not accusing anyone," I said. "I am stating a fact. I did not authorize this loan. I did not sign this paper. Listen," the woman said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming less corporate and more human. "I am just the case manager. But I will tell you this. We hear the 'I did not sign its' defense 10 times a day. Usually, it is a husband signing for a wife or a parent signing for a kid. It happens more than you think. But unless you have a police report and a fraud affidavit, the bank does not care. As far as the law is concerned, you owe us $500,000 plus interest. It happens more than you think." The words echoed the cynicism of the entire system. It was a world where families cannibalized each other for capital. "I will be in touch with your legal department," I said. "Do not contact me again without a lawyer present." I hung up before she could respond. I turned back to the PDF. I needed to see the rest. I scrolled down to the exhibits attached at the end of the file. There was a photocopy of my North Carolina driver's license. It was an old one, expired last year, but valid at the time of the signing. I stared at the photo. I remembered that license. I had lost it 2 years ago during a visit to my parents' house. I had thought it fell out of my purse in the driveway. I had searched the car, searched the grass, and eventually just went to the DMV to get a replacement. I had not lost it. Someone had taken it. And then, the notary stamp, State of North Carolina. Notary Public Linda G. Halloway. I knew that name. Linda Halloway was a woman from my mother's church group. She was the sweet, grandmotherly woman who always brought potato salad to the potlucks. She was my mother's prayer warrior partner. The picture was now complete. And it was uglier than I could have imagined. This was not just Brielle acting alone. You do not get a notarized loan with a fake signature and a stolen ID without a network. Brielle needed the money. Richard likely orchestrated the structure because he understood the legal language. Marianne provided the access the stolen ID, the friendly notary who would stamp a document without asking to see the signer. Because Marianne said it was okay. They had all conspired. It was a family project. The project was use Skyla's credit to fund Brielle's dream. And suddenly, the Thanksgiving dinner made perfect, horrific sense. Richard knew the loan was going bad. The email said Brielle had missed 3 payments. That meant the trouble started 3 months ago. They knew the bank was coming. They knew that eventually, Hawthorne and Pierce would track me down. The insults, the "go live in the streets" comment, it wasn't just cruelty. It was a preemptive strike. They were planting the seeds of my insolvency. They wanted the narrative to be that Skyla was broke. Skyla was unstable. Skyla was homeless. That way, when the bank came after me and I claimed I didn't sign the loan, the family could turn around and say, "She is lying. She signed it to help her sister. But now that she is broke and living on the streets, she is trying to weasel out of it." They were discrediting the witness before the trial even began. They were not just willing to steal from me. They were willing to destroy my credibility, my reputation, and my sanity to cover their tracks. They were prepared to watch me lose everything: my condo, my business, my name, just to keep Brielle's failing studio open for another 6 months. I looked at the forged signature again. It looked so fragile on the white page. A few curves of ink. My hands were no longer shaking. A cold calm had taken over. The kind of absolute zero focus I used when I was rewriting a kernel code that controlled 1,000 shipping containers. They wanted a guarantor, they had one, but they had misunderstood the definition of the word. A guarantor is someone who ensures the contract is fulfilled. I opened a new tab on my browser. I did not search for bankruptcy lawyers. I searched for criminal defense attorneys and forensic handwriting experts. I picked up the printed page of the loan agreement. I ran my finger over the fake signature. "You want to use my name," I whispered. "Fine. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what this name is worth." I reached for my phone again. I did not call my parents. I did not call Brielle. That time had passed. I navigated to my contacts and found the number for Grant Holloway, the most ruthless corporate litigator in the city. He cost $900 an hour, and he was worth every cent. It was time to introduce my family to the only language they seemed to respect: consequences. The offices of Holloway and Partners were located on the 42nd floor of the Bank of America Corporate Center, 8 floors above my own condo and a world away from the suburban mediocrity of my parents' house. I walked into the conference room at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The room smelled of polished mahogany and the expensive, crisp scent of billable hours. Grant Holloway was waiting for me. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Italian wool. We had worked together during the sale of Pilot House Systems, and he was one of the few people on Earth who knew the exact dimensions of my net worth. He was a shark in the murky waters of mergers and acquisitions, but his specialty was asset protection. I sat down and slid the folder across the table. I did not say hello. I simply said, "Tell me how bad it is." Grant opened the file. He adjusted his glasses and spent 5 minutes reading the loan documents I had printed that morning. His face remained impassive, a mask of professional neutrality, until he reached the signature page. He paused. He tilted the page toward the light. Then he looked at me. "This is sloppy work," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But it is dangerous work." He pressed a button on the intercom. "Send in Mr. Vance and get the forensic scanner." 10 minutes later, we were joined by a handwriting analyst Grant kept on retainer. We spent the next hour dissecting my own name. The analyst, a quiet man with thick spectacles, placed the forged document under a high-resolution digital microscope that projected the image onto a wall-mounted screen. "Look here," the analyst said, using a laser pointer to circle the top of the capital S. He pulled up a reference image of my actual signature from my incorporation papers. "In your genuine signature, the pressure is heaviest at the downstroke. You attack the paper. In the questioned document, the pressure is even throughout. That indicates the writer was drawing the shape, not signing a name. They were moving slowly, careful to stay within the lines of a memory or a tracing." He moved the pointer to the loop of the Y. "And here, see the microscopic ink bloat. The pen paused here for a fraction of a second. The forger hesitated. Natural signatures flow. Forgeries stutter. This is a simulation." Grant leaned back in his chair, tapping a gold pen against his chin. "So, it is not a mistake. It is not a clerical error where the bank mixed up files. This is intentional identity theft. It is worse than that." I said. I pulled out the timeline I had sketched on a notepad. "Look at the dates." Grant looked. October 14th, 2022. "They needed money for the renovation," I explained. "My father probably structured the deal, but his credit is leveraged to the hilt. Brielle had no assets, so they needed a guarantor with a clean sheet. They used my name because I was the ghost. I was the one who was never around, the one who supposedly didn't pay attention to details." Grant nodded slowly. "It is a classic predation strategy. They targeted you because they assumed you were weak enough to be exploited and rich enough, or at least credit-worthy enough to carry the load. But there is something else in the file that you need to see." He slid a tablet across the table. My team pulled the preliminary communication logs associated with the loan application. "We have a contact at the bank who owed us a favor. This is an email chain between the loan officer and the applicant, Brielle Stone." I looked at the screen. The email was dated a week before the signing. "From Brielle Stone to J. Miller, Loan officer subject, re-guarantor presence. Mr. Miller. Regarding the signing on the 14th. My sister Skyla has a severe anxiety disorder regarding legal proceedings. She has agreed to back the loan, but she asked if we could handle the paperwork quietly. She is very private and hates scenes. My mother will bring the notarized documents directly. Skyla will not be coming in. We just want to get this done without upsetting her. I felt the blood drain from my face. She has a severe anxiety disorder. That was the narrative. That was the lock that kept the door shut. They had used my weirdness, my introversion, my distance from the family, and weaponized it. They had painted a picture of a fragile, mentally unstable sister who was too anxious to come to the bank, justifying why I wasn't there to sign in person, and the bank, eager to close the deal and collect their fees, had looked the other way. They banked on your silence, Grant said, reading my expression. They calculated that even if you found out, you would not sue. They thought you would be too afraid of upsetting the family or causing a scene to take legal action. They used your own desire for privacy as a leash to choke you with. I looked up at Grant. The cold clarity from the morning returned. Harder this time. They miscalculated, I said. Grant stood up and walked to the whiteboard. He uncapped a black marker. We have two options. Skyla, and I need you to choose your weapon. He drew a vertical line down the center of the board. Option 1. The nuclear option. We file a police report for criminal fraud and identity theft. We sue the bank for negligence. We sue your sister and parents for damages. The loan is declared void ab initio invalid from the start. You walk away clean. And them I asked. Grant shrugged. Brielle goes to prison. Minimum 2 years for bank fraud. Your father loses his law license for facilitating it. Your mother likely faces conspiracy charges. The notary loses her commission and faces jail time. The family is destroyed publicly and permanently. I stared at the board. It was the justice they deserved, but it was messy. It involved years of court dates, tabloid headlines, and me being dragged through the mud as the daughter who put her family in jail. It was a victory, but it was a Pyrrhic one. Option 2, I asked. Option 2 is the financial option, Grant said. He drew a dollar sign on the other side of the board. The loan is currently in default. The bank is nervous. They know the documentation is shaky. I can smell the fear in their emails. They want this off their books before the regulators see it. We approach the bank not as a victim, but as an investor. I frowned. Explain. We buy the note, Grant said. We set up a shell company, Rivergate Holdings LLC or something similar. We approach the bank and offer to buy the debt at a discount. The bank will be happy to sell a non-performing loan for 80 cents on the dollar just to clear the liability. And once I own the note, I asked. Grant smiled. It was not a nice smile. Once you own the note, you are the bank. You step into the shoes of the creditor. You own the debt. You own the collateral. You control the timeline. You can foreclose on Brielle's studio. You can seize the assets. You can enforce the personal guarantees. And you can do it all without ever stepping inside a courtroom. I looked at the two options. The nuclear option was a hammer. The financial option was a scalpel. But then, a thought occurred to me. Why choose Grant? I said, can we do both? He raised an eyebrow. Both, I want to buy the note. I said, I want to own the debt. I want to hold the leash. But I also want the evidence of fraud documented. I want the leverage of prison time hanging over their heads. But I want the control of being their creditor. Grant thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. It is aggressive. We can commission a private forensic audit to prove the fraud. We keep that in our back pocket. Meanwhile, we buy the note. If they fight the foreclosure, we drop the fraud evidence on the table. It is a checkmate in 2 moves. Do it, I said. Grant began writing on the whiteboard again, mapping out the timeline. He wrote Thanksgiving in red ink. Then he wrote homeless rumors. Then he wrote loan default. Look at this, he said, stepping back. This is the timeline of their desperation. I walked up to the board. The dates told a story that was even more cynical than I had realized. October 1st. Brielle misses her second payment. October 15th. The bank sends a warning letter. November 1st. Brielle misses the third payment. The loan goes into default status. The bank threatens to contact the guarantor. November 23rd. Thanksgiving. Richard tells me to go live in the streets. November 26th. Marianne tells the church. I am homeless. They knew. I whispered. On Thanksgiving. They knew the bank was about to call me. They knew the jig was up. Exactly. Grant said. The live in the streets comment wasn't just an insult. It was psychological preparation. They were trying to break your confidence so that when the bank called, you would feel helpless. They were trying to position you as a failure socially so that nobody would believe you were a victim financially. They wanted you to be too ashamed to fight back. I traced the line on the whiteboard with my finger. They thought they were playing chess. They thought I was just a piece on the board to be sacrificed. They did not know I had $25 million in the bank and the best lawyer in the state standing in the room. Set up the LLC. I told Grant, I want the name to be obscure. Rivergate Holdings is fine. Make the offer to the bank tomorrow. Tell them you represent a private equity firm interested in distressed retail assets. Do not let them know it is me. And the fraud investigation, Grant asked. Full steam ahead. I said, I want the affidavits. I want the expert testimony regarding the signature. I want the notary's logs. I want it all packaged in a nice, neat legal binder. Grant closed the folder. It will cost you. The retainer alone will be $50,000. I pulled my checkbook out of my purse. It was the only time I would use a pen that day. I wrote the check for $100,000. Speed it up, I said. I want to own that debt before they have time to realize the ground is shifting. Grant took the check. You know, Skyla. Usually when people do this, it is about revenge. They want to see the other person bleed. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Brielle was probably panic buying fabric she couldn't afford, and Richard was probably pouring a scotch, telling himself he did what he had to do to save the family honor. I am not looking for revenge, Grant, I said, turning back to him. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This is not about making them bleed. Then what is it, he asked. I picked up my purse and walked to the door. I am just tired of being the fire extinguisher. I said, for 30 years. They have set fires and expected me to put them out. They used my silence, my name, and my credit to keep themselves warm. Now, I am just removing the safety equipment. If they burn, it is because they lit the match. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I watched the numbers count down. 42, 41, 40. I was descending back to street level, but I felt like I was ascending. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter, or the sister, or the failure. I was the majority shareholder in their destruction, and business was about to be very, very good. The collapse of Brielle's empire happened faster than even my most aggressive algorithms could have predicted. I had expected a slow burn, a gradual erosion of capital over 6 months. I was wrong. It was not a leak. It was a landslide. 2 days after I retained Grant Holloway, I sat in his office again. The view of the city was the same, but the atmosphere inside the room had shifted. The air was charged with the static electricity of imminent action. Grant did not offer me coffee this time. He offered me a file that was thick with the autopsy of my sister's business. The patient is coding, Grant said, tossing the folder onto the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. Hawthorne and Pierce are panicked. They are not just looking at missed payments anymore. They are looking at total insolvency. I opened the file. The numbers were catastrophic. Brielle had not just missed rent. She was 3 months behind on the lease for her primary location, and the landlord had already drafted eviction papers. Her primary fabric supplier in Italy had placed a hold on all shipments due to unpaid invoices totaling $40,000. And worst of all, there was a string of chargebacks from angry brides who had received dresses that were ill-fitting or unfinished. It is a death spiral, Grant explained, pacing the length of the room. When the cash flow stops, the inventory stops. When the inventory stops, the sales stop. And when the sales stop, the debt becomes a heavy stone around the neck. The bank knows this. They know that if they wait for a court judgment, There will be nothing left to seize but some used sewing machines and a pile of cheap lace. So they want out. I said, "It was not a question. They are desperate to offload the risk." Grant confirmed. "They see the writing on the wall. They know the guarantor you is contesting the signature. They do not want a fraud lawsuit. They just want their capital back, or at least a portion of it. They are looking for a buyer for the note." This was the moment. The window was open. I looked at Grant. "Do they know it is me?" "No," Grant said. "I approached them through a broker. I told them I represent a private investment group looking for distressed retail assets. They have no idea Skyla Stone is involved. To them, it is just an anonymous LLC swooping in to pick over the carcass." "Good," I said. "Keep it that way." We spent the next hour constructing the cage. I had instructed my accountants to form a new legal entity earlier that morning. It was called Rivergate Holdings, LLC. The name meant nothing. It was bland, corporate, and sounded vaguely like an insurance company or a property management firm. It was the perfect mask. I signed the operating agreement as the sole member, but Grant would act as the authorized signatory for all public interactions. Rivergate Holdings would be the face of the executioner. I would be the mind behind it. Then came the second shock. Grant pulled up the UCC filings, the Uniform Commercial Code documents that detailed exactly what had been pledged as collateral for the loan. I had assumed, naively, that the loan was secured only by the inventory, the dresses, the veils, the shoes. I was wrong. "Look at the schedule of assets," Grant said, tapping the screen. "Your father really did a number here. He didn't just pledge the inventory, he pledged the leasehold interest and the hard assets." I leaned in. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. The loan was secured by everything: the expensive industrial sewing machines, the custom lighting fixtures, the point-of-sale computer systems. Even the lease itself, the right to occupy the space, was tied to the loan. And there was more. They pledged the intellectual property. Grant said quietly, "The brand name. Brielle and Cotto, Bridal. The customer lists, the website domain. If you buy this note, Skyla, and if you foreclose, you do not just get the furniture, you own the company. You can lock them out of their own building. You can take the website offline. You can literally turn off the lights." I sat back, absorbing the magnitude of the leverage. Richard had been so arrogant, so sure that Brielle would succeed, that he had bet the entire farm. He had signed away the very existence of the business, assuming that the day of reckoning would never come, or perhaps assuming that if it did come, he could bully me into covering the loss. He had handed me the keys to the kingdom, and he did not even know it. "Purchase the note," I said. My voice was steady, void of any tremor. "Offer them $500,000. That is a discount on the principal, but it saves them the legal fees of fighting me on the fraud. They will take it." Grant nodded. "They will take it in a heartbeat." He made the call right there in the room. I listened as he spoke to the bank's asset manager. He was smooth, professional, painting a picture of Rivergate Holdings as a benevolent investor looking to restructure the debt. He did not mention that the restructuring would involve an axe. When he hung up, he smiled. It was a shark smile. "Done. They are drafting the assignment of debt now. By tomorrow afternoon, Rivergate Holdings will be the primary creditor for Brielle and Coe Bridal. You will own the debt." The financial trap was set. Now I needed to confirm the moral rot. Grant reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller sealed envelope. "This is the report from the handwriting expert. Combined with the private investigator's findings on the notary, I took the envelope. It felt light, but I knew the contents were heavy enough to crush a reputation. I slit the seal and slid out the papers. The forensic analysis of the signature was conclusive. Highly probable simulation. The report read, "Inconsistencies in pen pressure and stroke order indicate a deliberate attempt to copy the exemplar." But it was the second page that made my blood turn to ice. The notary, Linda Halloway, had been interviewed by the investigator under the guise of a routine compliance check. She had cracked almost immediately. Subject admitted to notarizing the document without the signatory present. The report stated, subject stated she did so as a personal favor to Marianne Stone. Subject claimed Mrs. Stone assured her that her daughter Skyla was too busy to come in and had given verbal permission. I stared at the name, Linda Halloway. I remembered her. She was a fixture in my childhood. She sat 2 pews behind us at church every Sunday. She had knitted me a scarf when I went away to college. She was one of the good women of the congregation, always talking about righteousness and truth. And yet, for a personal favor, she had violated the law and helped my mother frame me for a $600,000 debt. It was a conspiracy of the righteous. They had justified it to themselves. I was sure. They probably told themselves they were helping the family. It is for a good cause. Marianne would have said, Skyla won't mind. She is family. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was communal. My mother had used her social network, her church connections, to facilitate the fraud. She had turned her prayer group into a crime ring. This ends now, I said, sliding the report back into the envelope. Grant looked at me. Now that you own the note, you have the power to trigger the default clause immediately. We can send the demand letter tomorrow. 7 days to pay in full, or we seize the assets. No, I said, not yet. Grant looked surprised. Why wait? Every day you wait is money lost, because I need them to feel safe one last time. I said, I want them to think the bank has gone quiet. I want them to think they dodged the bullet, and I need to verify one last thing. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were beginning to flicker on as the evening approached. I need to talk to Caleb. I said, Caleb Vance, Brielle's fiancé. He was the anomaly in the Stone orbit. Caleb was a landscape architect, a man who worked with his hands and understood the patience of growing things. He was kind, soft-spoken, and utterly ill-equipped for the viper pit he was marrying into. He had always been decent to me, at family gatherings, while Richard ignored me and Brielle mocked me. Caleb would ask about my work. He would listen. He treated me like a human being, not a prop. I suspected he was innocent in this. I suspected he didn't know about the forgery. But I needed to be sure. If I was going to drop a bomb on the family, I wanted to make sure the one decent person had a chance to find a shelter. I left Grant's office and drove to a small coffee shop on the edge of the Arts District. It was a neutral ground, far away from the country club and the high-rise banks. I had texted Caleb earlier, asking for a quick meetup. I told him it was about a wedding gift. He was sitting at a corner table when I arrived, looking haggard. He was a handsome man, usually with a bright, easy smile. But today he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was staring into a black coffee. His shoulders slumped. When he saw me, he stood up, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Skyla, it is good to see you. I was surprised you reached out. I sat down across from him. I did not order anything. I just looked at him, studying his face for any sign of deception. I saw only exhaustion. How are you holding up, Caleb? I asked. He let out a short, dry laugh. Honestly, it has been a rough month. The wedding planning is intense. And the business, he trailed off, looking away. He didn't want to gossip. He was loyal. I heard things are tight at the studio. I said gently. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. Tight is an understatement. Brielle is stressed out of her mind. Richard is stressed. It feels like everyone is walking on eggshells. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. Skyla, can I ask you something? And please, do not get mad. Go ahead, I said. Is it true? About you? Marianne has been telling everyone that you are well, that you are in a bad spot financially, that you might lose your apartment. I looked at him. This was the test. Do I look like I'm losing my apartment? I asked. I was wearing a cashmere coat that cost $3,000 and a watch that was worth more than his truck. Caleb looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the realization dawn in his eyes. No, he said slowly. You do not. You look powerful. I leaned forward. Caleb, listen to me very carefully. I am not homeless. I am not broke. In fact, I am doing better than anyone in this family could possibly imagine. Caleb frowned, confusion knitting his brow. Then why would Marianne say that? Why would Richard let people believe it? Because they need a scapegoat. I said, and because they need a cover story. Cover story for what he asked. I hesitated. I couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. I couldn't tell him that I was Rivergate Holdings. I couldn't tell him that I held the mortgage on his fiancée's dreams. There are things happening. Caleb, I said, things involving money and papers that I never signed. Caleb's face went pale. The papers. I froze. What papers? Caleb. He looked down at his hands. A few months ago. Brielle was panicked. She said the bank needed a cosigner. She said Richard couldn't do it. She told me Marianne fixed it. I didn't ask how. I should have asked how. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. Did they use you? He knew. He didn't know the details, but his gut had told him something was wrong, and he had buried it because he loved her. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. It was a gesture of mercy, perhaps the last one I would offer this family. Caleb, I said, I am going to give you a piece of advice. Do not sign anything. Do not put your name on any lease, any loan, or any guarantee for that studio. If you have any assets, your truck, your savings, keep them separate. Why, he whispered. What is going to happen? I stood up. I couldn't save Brielle. I couldn't save Richard or Marianne. They had made their choices, but Caleb was just a casualty of war. The storm is coming. Caleb, I said, and it is going to wash everything away. Just make sure you are not standing in the flood zone. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Grant. The wire transfer has cleared. Rivergate Holdings, LLC, is officially the owner of the note. The bank has transferred all files. We have control. I stopped on the sidewalk. The evening air was cold, biting against my skin. I took a deep breath. It tasted of exhaust and winter. I owned them. I owned the dresses. I owned the machines. I owned the lease. I owned the lie. I unlocked my car and got in. I checked the calendar on my phone. Tomorrow was Tuesday. I would let them sweat for 2 more days. I would let Brielle think she had gotten away with it. I would let Richard sleep soundly, thinking his clever little scheme had worked. And then, on Thursday, exactly 3 weeks after they told me to live in the streets, I would introduce them to their new landlord. I started the engine. The drive home was smooth. For the first time in weeks, the road ahead was perfectly clear. Wednesday night settled over Charlotte like a heavy wool blanket. It was 11:45 in the evening, and the city lights below my condo were blurring into streaks of rain on the glass. I was not sleeping. I was sitting in the dark of my living room, the blue light of my tablet illuminating my face, reviewing the final draft of the asset purchase agreement one last time. My phone, resting on the arm of the sofa, lit up. The vibration against the leather sounded like an insect buzzing in a jar. It was Caleb Vance. I hesitated before answering. I had given Caleb a warning yesterday, a lifeline to pull himself out of the blast radius, if he was calling me now. Late at night, it meant the water was already rising inside the Stone family home. I slid my thumb across the screen. Hello, Caleb, I said softly. Skyla. His voice was a harsh whisper. I could hear the echo of a small space, perhaps a bathroom or a garage. He was hiding. They are losing their minds over here. I set the tablet down. Tell me. Hawthorne and Pierce stopped calling. Caleb said, the collection calls stopped yesterday. Richard thinks it means his letter worked. He sent them a letter threatening a countersuit for harassment. He is strutting around the kitchen telling Marianne that he stared the bank down, but Brielle is terrified. She thinks it is the calm before the storm. Brielle was smarter than Richard. I noted. That was a low bar, but at least she had instincts. And what are they saying about me, I asked. There was a pause. I heard Caleb take a shaky breath. Skyla, you need to know what they are preparing. I heard Richard on the phone with his old law partner. He is building a defense in case you find out about the loan. Go on. I said, he is going to say you agreed to it. Caleb said, he is going to say you verbally authorized the signature to help your sister. But then you got jealous of Brielle's expansion plans and decided to renege. He is going to paint you as the bitter, vindictive sister who is trying to sabotage Brielle out of spite. He is going to say the homeless rumors were actually started by you to garner sympathy. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It was fascinating. Really. Richard was not just a liar, he was an architect of lies. He was constructing a reality where he was the victim of an ungrateful daughter, rather than the perpetrator of a felony. He is gaslighting the entire situation. I said, yes, Caleb said, and Marianne is backing him up. She told Brielle that if you ever ask about the signature, she should just say, Skyla knows about it. She just forgot. They are counting on your memory being questioned. They are counting on you being too weak to fight a united front. I leaned back into the sofa cushions. They were preparing for a skirmish. They did not know they were standing in the middle of a nuclear testing site. Did you ask about the mechanics, Caleb? I asked. Did you ask who actually held the pen? I did. He whispered. I asked Brielle tonight. She was crying. She said she was too scared to do it herself. She said her hand was shaking too much. So who signed my name, Mom? Caleb said. The word hung in the air. Heavy and toxic. Mom? Marianne Stone, the woman who quoted scripture at the dinner table, the woman who adjusted napkins and worried about appearances. She hadn't just facilitated the crime, she had committed it. She had sat down, practiced my name, and executed the forgery with her own hand. It makes sense, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She knows my handwriting better than anyone. She used to sign my report cards when I was a child. Skyla, there is something else, Caleb said. His voice dropped even lower. I debated whether to send this to you. I do not want to destroy the family. I just do not want them to destroy you. You are not destroying anything. Caleb, I said, you are just turning on the lights. Send it. I have an audio file, he said. My phone was recording a voice memo for a site visit yesterday, and I left it on the kitchen counter by accident. It picked up a conversation between Marianne and Richard while I was in the other room. Send it, I repeated. A moment later, a file appeared in my message inbox. It was a simple audio waveform, jagged little peaks and valleys representing the betrayal of my bloodline. I tapped play. The audio was scratchy at first, the sound of silverware clinking on plates. Then, Richard's voice, booming and confident. She will not sue, Marianne. She does not have the stomach for court. She folds every time I raise my voice. Then, my mother's voice. It was not the soft, wavering voice she used in public. It was sharp, practical, and cold. I am not worried about her suing. Richard, I am worried about the bank, but we just need to get through the next 60 days. Once the expansion opens, Brielle can make the payments, and regarding Skyla, even if she finds out later, what can she do? It will be done. She isn't going to send her own mother to jail. We just have to hold the line. After 2 months, it is too late for her to complain. We just tell her we did it for her own good, to help her build credit, for her own good. I stopped the recording. The silence in my condo was absolute. There it was, the smoking gun. It wasn't just desperation. It was calculation. They were banking on my love for them, or rather, my guilt to protect them from the consequences of their theft. They believed that I was so desperate for their approval that I would eat a $600,000 debt just to keep the peace. They thought I was a doormat. I picked up the phone again. Thank you. Caleb, what are you going to do? He asked. I am going to finish this, I said. But I need you to do one last thing for me. Anything, he said. Tomorrow morning. Rivergate Holdings is going to contact Richard. We are going to demand an immediate meeting to discuss the default. We are going to offer a settlement negotiation instead of an immediate foreclosure. Okay, Caleb said. They will think Rivergate is just some corporate entity. I explained. They will think they can charm their way out of it, or lie their way into an extension. I need you to make sure they all come. Richard, Marianne, Brielle, tell them it is their only chance to save the studio. Where Caleb asked, Juniper and Oak, I said, the private dining room in the back. 7 o'clock on Thursday night, Juniper and Oak, Caleb repeated. That is expensive. It is appropriate. I said, it is where people go to celebrate. And tomorrow, we are going to celebrate the truth. I hung up the phone. I did not sleep that night. I spent the hours until dawn sitting by the window, watching the rain stop and the city wake up. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. The hurt, the deep, childish part of me that just wanted my mother to love me had finally been cauterized by the sound of her voice on that recording. She isn't going to send her own mother to jail. She was right. In a way, I wasn't going to send her to jail. I was going to let her walk into the cell herself and lock the door. Thursday morning, I met Grant Holloway at his office. He looked fresh, rested, and ready for blood. "The transfer is complete," he said as soon as I walked in. "Rivergate Holdings LLC is now the legal holder of the promissory note and all security agreements. We have the power of God over that bridal studio." I sat down. I played him the recording Caleb had sent. Grant listened, his face hardening. When it finished, he let out a low whistle. "That is admissibility gold," he said. "It proves intent. It proves conspiracy. It destroys any defense of accidental signing or implied authority. If we play this in front of a judge, your mother gets 5 years, minimum." I nodded. "Put it on a flash drive," I said, "and print the transcript. I want it in the file." Grant opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 thick binders. He placed them side by side on the table. They looked identical from the outside black leather. Heavy, authoritative. "This is the setup," Grant said, tapping the left binder, binder A, the civil file. "This contains the purchase of the debt, the default notice, and the foreclosure documents. This is the business end. This says, 'Pay me or I take everything.'" He tapped the right binder. Binder B, the criminal file. "This contains the forensic handwriting analysis, the investigator's report on the notary, the affidavit from the bank confirming the fraud, and now, the transcript of that recording. This is the nuclear end. This says, 'You are felons.'" I looked at the 2 binders. They represented the 2 paths my family could take. "We walk in with both," I said. Grant nodded. "We present binder A first. We let them think this is just about money. We let them try to negotiate. We let Richard try to bully Rivergate Holdings. And when they refuse to pay, or when they try to lie. Then we open binder B." I finished. "Exactly," Grant said. He checked his watch. "I have booked the room at Juniper and Oak. I told the staff we are a private equity firm conducting a sensitive acquisition. We will have total privacy." "Good," I said. "Skyla," Grant said, his voice softening slightly, "you need to be prepared for their reaction. When they walk in and see you, they are not going to be ashamed. Not at first. They are going to be angry. They are going to feel tricked. I know." I said, "They are narcissists. They will see my success as a personal attack on them." Grant stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Just remember, you are not their daughter tonight. You are the chairman of the board of Rivergate Holdings. You are the entity that owns their debt. Keep that distance. If you let them drag you back into the family dynamic, you lose." I stood up to meet him. I was wearing a suit I had bought in Milan a year ago. Sharp charcoal wool that fit like armor. I had pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. I wore no jewelry except for my watch. "I am not their daughter," I repeated. "I am the consequences of their actions." The day passed in a blur of low-level anxiety, but by the time 6 o'clock arrived, I was calm. I drove to the restaurant alone. Juniper and Oak was located in a restored textile mill. All exposed brick and dim Edison bulbs. It was the kind of place my family loved because it projected an image of rustic wealth. I entered through the back entrance, guided by the host who knew me by my corporate name. "Right this way." "Ms. Stone," he said. "Mr. Holloway is already inside." The private room was enclosed in glass, but soundproof. A long table made of reclaimed wood sat in the center. Grant was already there, arranging the 2 black binders at the head of the table. He looked up and nodded. "They are 5 minutes out," he said, glancing at his phone. "Caleb just texted. He is driving them. He said Richard is rehearsing a speech about fiduciary responsibility and good faith efforts." I took my seat at the head of the table, facing the door. I placed my hands flat on the wood. The surface was cool. "I asked you to bring the portable projector," I asked. Grant pointed to a sleek device sitting on a side table. "Connected and ready. The signature analysis is queued up. Perfect. I heard voices in the hallway. The heavy oak door muffled them, but I could distinguish the tones. Richard's blustering baritone, Marianne's nervous, fluttery soprano, Brielle's sharp, complaining whine. "Why do we have to meet at dinner?" Brielle was saying. "I don't have an appetite. It is a power move." "Sweetie," Richard replied, his voice muffled. "They want to intimidate us. But do not worry. I have handled sharks like this before. We just need to buy time." I watched the door handle turn. It was a slow, heavy rotation. Grant stood up, smoothing his tie. I remained seated. The door swung open. Marianne entered first, wearing her Sunday best, a blue dress that she thought made her look demure. Richard followed, wearing his courtroom suit, a navy pinstripe that was 10 years out of fashion. Brielle brought up the rear, looking pale, and clutching a designer handbag that I knew was likely put on a credit card she couldn't pay. Caleb lingered in the doorway, his eyes meeting mine for a split second before he looked at the floor. They walked in with their chins up, ready to face a stranger, ready to lie to a suit from a bank. They saw Grant first. Richard stepped forward, extending his hand, a practiced, oily smile on his face. "Good evening," he boomed. "I am Richard Stone, legal counsel for Brielle and Company. I assume you are the representative from Rivergate, then." He looked past Grant. He saw the person sitting at the head of the table. He saw the charcoal suit. He saw the face that he had looked at with disdain across the Thanksgiving table 3 weeks ago. Richard stopped mid-step. His hand dropped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marianne gasped, a sharp intake of air that sounded like a tire puncturing. She grabbed Richard's arm. Brielle froze, her eyes widening until they were white circles in her pale face. "Skyla," Richard whispered. The booming confidence evaporated, replaced by a confusion so profound it was almost comical. "What are you doing here?" I did not smile. I did not stand up. I simply looked at them, one by one. I let the silence stretch until it was tight enough to snap a neck. "Please, sit down," I said. My voice was calm, professional, and terrifyingly polite. "Skyla, this is a private meeting," Richard stammered, his face flushing red. "We are meeting with the investors who bought Brielle's loan. You cannot be here. This is serious business, not some game." I motioned to the chairs opposite me. "I know exactly who you are meeting." "Richard," I said. Brielle stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Skyla, get out. Seriously, we are in trouble, and we don't have time for your drama. The people from Rivergate Holdings are going to be here any second." Grant Holloway stepped forward. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, Mrs. Stone, Ms. Stone," he said formally. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." He gestured toward me with an open hand. "May I introduce you to the sole managing member and primary shareholder of Rivergate Holdings, LLC," he said. The room went dead silent. Grant continued, his voice hammering the nails into the coffin. "The entity that purchased your promissory note yesterday, the entity that currently holds the lien on your business, your inventory, your lease, and your personal assets." He looked at Richard. "You are not meeting with a stranger, Mr. Stone. You are meeting with Skyla." I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. Richard's face went from red to gray. Marianne put a hand to her mouth. Brielle grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "You bought the debt," Brielle whispered. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "I did not just buy the debt. Brielle," I said, "I bought the truth." I tapped the black binder in front of me. "Now, sit down. We have a lot of paperwork to review, and I suggest you do not lie to me. Because unlike the bank, I know exactly whose handwriting is on the bottom of that contract." Richard sank into a chair, his legs seemingly giving out. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I did not see a father looking at a disappointment. I saw a man looking at his judge. The trap was sprung, the steel jaws had slammed shut, and there was nowhere left to run. The silence in the private dining room of Juniper and Oak was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized. It felt less like a restaurant and more like a submarine descending past its crush depth. Grant Holloway had just dropped the guillotine blade. "You are meeting with Skyla, and the echo of those words seemed to vibrate against the exposed brick walls. I watched them. I watched the people who had raised me, the people who had shared my blood and my dinner table, as they attempted to process the impossibility of the moment. They were standing at the edge of the abyss, and their reactions were a masterclass in human psychology. Marianne was the first to move. Her training as the consummate hostess kicked in, a reflexive defense mechanism against awkwardness. She blinked rapidly, her hands fluttering up to touch the pearl necklace at her throat, and then she forced a smile. It was a terrible, brittle thing, like a crack in a porcelain plate. She pulled out the chair to my right, the position of the guest of honor, and sat down with a stiff, unnatural grace. "Well," she said, her voice pitching slightly higher than usual, "this is unexpected, but I suppose the Lord works in mysterious ways." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for a return to the script where we pretended everything was fine. "Thank you for arranging this, Skyla," she continued, smoothing her napkin on her lap. "It was quite a shock, hearing that name Rivergate Holdings, but knowing it is you, well, it is a relief, really. We were so worried we would be dealing with some heartless banker. I hope we can count on your cooperation to clear this mess up quickly." She was trying to reframe the narrative in real time. In her mind, I was no longer the adversary. I was the safety net. She had decided, in the span of 10 seconds, that I had bought the debt to save them. Richard did not sit immediately. He stood behind his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the wood. His face was a map of conflict. His pride was warring with his fear. And for a man like Richard Stone, pride usually won until the very last second. He jutted his chin out, his eyes darting between me and Grant, measuring the threat level. He was looking for the weakness, the daughter he could bully. "Sit down, Richard," I said. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated it as an inevitability. He ground his teeth, a muscle in his jaw jumping, but he sat. He pulled the chair in with a sharp scrape against the floor. He placed his elbows on the table and clasped his hands, creating a barricade. "Let us cut the theatrics," he said, his voice struggling to find its usual booming resonance. "So, you bought the note. Fine, you obviously have some money now. You want to feel important. You want to dangle this over our heads to make a point about what respect?" He scoffed, a dismissive sound that was meant to belittle me. "We are family, Skyla," he said, regaining some of his bluster. "And because we are family, we need a reasonable plan. We are not going to be extorted. You cannot treat your father like a common debtor. I expect no. I demand that we restructure this immediately, interest-free, with a grace period until the studio stabilizes. That is the only fair solution." He was issuing orders. He was sitting at a table I controlled, eating air in a room I paid for, discussing a debt I owned, and he was still issuing orders. I turned my gaze to Brielle. She had collapsed into her chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The golden child shine was gone, replaced by the dull mat of exhaustion and fear. But as she looked at me, really looked at my suit, my watch, the way Grant deferred to me, her fear began to mutate into something else. It turned into indignation. She saw the wealth, she saw the power, and she hated me for it. "You have money," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but gaining volume. "You have real money." She looked at Caleb, then back at me. "You let me suffer," she accused, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You knew I was drowning. You knew I couldn't pay the rent. You knew I was losing staff. And you just sat in your high tower and watched Brielle." I said calmly, "No." She slammed her hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "Why do you have to make a scene? You could have just written a check. You could have just paid it off if you're so rich. But no, you had to do this. You had to buy the debt so you could humiliate us. You are sick, Skyla. You are jealous and you are sick." The entitlement was breathtaking. In her world, my resources were automatically her resources. My success was only valid if it served her needs. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. I looked at the three of them, the mother who forged, the father who bullied, and the sister who took. "I have a question. I said. The quietness of my voice cut through Brielle's rant like a razor. I looked at Marianne, then Richard, then Brielle. Do you think I need you? I asked. Or do you think you need me? The question hung in the air. Richard scoffed again. Do not be ridiculous. We are your parents. You will always need us. You crave our approval. That is what this whole stunt is about. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. I do not need you. I do not need your approval. I do not need your love. Because I realized a long time ago that what you call love is just a transaction I can never afford. I motioned to the black binder in front of Grant. But you, I said, you need me, because right now, I am the only thing standing between you and total ruin. Grant, proceed. Grant Holloway opened the folder. He did not do it aggressively. He did it with the precise, methodical movement of a coroner pulling back a sheet. He extracted a single document, the notice of default and acceleration, and slid it across the table toward Richard. Mr. Stone, Grant said, his tone purely professional. You seem to be laboring under a misapprehension regarding the nature of this meeting. Richard glared at the paper without touching it. We are here to negotiate terms. Grant shook his head. No, sir. We are not here to negotiate terms. We are here to inform you of the reality of your position. Grant placed a second document on the table. It was the asset seizure schedule. Rivergate Holdings LLC is not a family trust, Grant said. It is a private equity vehicle. And as of yesterday, Brielle and Company Bridal is in total default. We are not looking for a payment plan. We are exercising our right to accelerate the full balance of the loan, $620,000. I said, payable immediately. Richard's face turned a violent shade of purple. You cannot do that. It is unconscionable. We have rights. You have nothing. Grant interrupted, his voice sharpening. You have a lease that is 3 months in arrears. You have inventory that is unpaid for. And you have a creditor who is tired of waiting. Brielle started to cry, putting her face in her hands. Mom, do something. Tell her to stop. Marianne looked at me, her eyes wide and wet. Skyla, please, be reasonable. We cannot pay that. You know we cannot pay that. Why are you doing this? Is it because of Thanksgiving? Is it because of what your father said? I am sorry. Okay, we are sorry. Just stop this. It was the first time I had heard the word sorry in that house in 20 years, but it was not an apology. It was a bargaining chip. I looked at my mother. It is not about Thanksgiving. Marianne. Then what is it? She pleaded. We are family. Grant cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the small room. He reached into the second binder, the one I had labeled the nuclear option in my mind, but he did not open it yet. He just rested his hand on the cover. Mr. Stone, Mrs. Stone, Grant said. Before you invoke the word family again, I suggest you look at the document in front of you very carefully, because my client is not operating as your daughter tonight. She is operating as the person whose name is on that loan. Richard looked up, confused. We know her name is on the loan. She is the guarantor. That is why we are here. No, I said. I leaned forward, my chest pressing against the edge of the table. I locked eyes with Richard. I am not the guarantor because I agreed to be. I said, I am the guarantor because someone in this room decided that my name was a piece of public property. The air in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard stopped breathing. Marianne went perfectly still, like a deer hearing the snap of a twig. Brielle lifted her head from her hands, her mascara smeared, her eyes darting to her mother. Grant tapped the binder under his hand. We are not here to discuss a payment plan for a legitimate loan, Grant said. We are here to discuss the fact that Rivergate Holdings has acquired a debt instrument that was secured through felony identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a heart stopping. Richard opened his mouth, but closed it. He looked at the binder under Grant's hand. He looked at the confident set of my shoulders, and for the first time, the arrogance vanished. In its place was the terrified realization that he had walked into a trap from which there was no exit. I did not blink. "You wanted a meeting with the bank," I said softly. "You have one." The air in the private dining room seemed to solidify, turning into a substance so thick it was difficult to breathe. Grant Holloway's words hung between us like a suspended guillotine blade. "You are meeting with Skyla." Richard stared at me. His face, usually a mask of arrogant certainty, was undergoing a slow, painful disintegration. He looked from me to the legal binder, then back to me, trying to reconcile the daughter he had dismissed as a failure with the creditor who now held his fate in her hands. "Do you own Rivergate?" he stammered. The booming baritone was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy rasp. "That is impossible. You do not have that kind of capital. You are a technician. You fix computers." Grant did not let me answer. He leaned forward, his voice stripping away the last shreds of their delusion. "Ms. Stone is the founder and majority shareholder of 2 major automation firms," Grant said, his tone clinically precise. "Her net income last year exceeded $25 million. She purchased your non-performing loan 2 days ago via a wire transfer that did not even trigger a liquidity warning on her accounts. She is not a technician. Mr. Stone, she is the bank. $25 million. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Brielle gasped, a sound that was half sob, half shriek. Marianne's hand flew to her mouth, covering a tremor that was rapidly spreading to her entire body. Richard's face flushed a violent, ugly red. The shock was quickly replaced by a surge of defensive rage. He slammed his hand onto the table, making the water glasses jump. "This is a setup," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this on purpose. You bought this debt to humiliate us. You are doing this out of spite because of what I said at Thanksgiving. This is nothing but a petty, vindictive revenge trip." He looked at Grant, trying to find an ally in the other man in the room. "This is predatory. She is using insider information to destroy her own sister. I will not stand for it. I will sue you for bad faith practices." I remained perfectly still. I did not flinch at his shouting. I did not raise my voice. I simply waited for him to run out of breath. When he finally stopped, panting slightly, I spoke. "It is not revenge. Richard." I reached out and flipped open the second binder, the one Grant had kept closed until this moment. I spun it around so it faced them. "I bought the debt because my name is on it," I said, "and I never signed it." I watched the color drain out of Richard's face. It happened instantly, like a light switch being flicked off. He looked down at the document on top of the pile. It was the forensic analysis of the signature. Marianne let out a low moan. She shrank back in her chair, looking small and withered. "We needed to," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Skyla, you have to understand. It was for the family. Brielle needed the money, and your credit was the only way. We were going to pay it back. We never meant for you to find out. You never meant for me to find out," I repeated, my voice dropping to a chill whisper. "You stole my identity. Marianne, you forged my signature. You used a friend from church to notarize a fake document. That is not a family misunderstanding. That is a felony." Marianne burst into tears. It was a terrified, weeping sound. She looked at Richard, then at Brielle, desperate for someone to tell her it wasn't true. "But we are family," she cried, reaching across the table as if to touch my hand. I pulled back sharply. "You are my daughter. Mothers and daughters help each other. I signed it because I knew you would want to help your sister if you weren't so difficult." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. Even now, caught in the act of a crime, she was blaming me. She had forged the signature because I was difficult. Grant pulled a sheet of paper from the binder. According to the affidavit from the handwriting expert, the signature is a clumsy simulation. Grant read aloud, and according to the investigator's interview with Linda Holloway, the notary admitted that she did not witness Skyla signing the document. She stated that Marianne Stone brought the papers to her house and assured her that Skyla had given verbal consent. Grant looked over his glasses at Marianne. "That is conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Mrs. Stone, in the state of North Carolina. That carries a prison sentence of up to 10 years. Brielle, who had been staring at the table, suddenly snapped. She looked up, her eyes red and wild. "Stop it!" she screamed. "Just stop it!" She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "So what?" "So Mom signed it. Who cares? You have $25 million. She stood up, leaning over the table, her bracelets jangling. "You are rich, Skyla. You are filthy rich, and you are sitting here threatening Mom with jail over a stupid signature. Why didn't you just pay it? Why didn't you just write the check and save the studio? You could fix this in 5 minutes. You are my sister, and you are watching me burn because you are too selfish to share." I looked at Brielle. I looked at the entitlement that had been fed and watered by my parents for 30 years. She genuinely believed that my money was her safety net. She believed that her failure was my responsibility to fix. I stood up slowly. I was taller than her in my heels, and for the first time, I felt infinitely larger than all of them. "I am not watching you burn. Brielle," I said, "I am watching you face reality." I walked around the edge of the table until I was standing right next to her. She flinched, but she did not back down. "You ask why I didn't save you," I asked softly. "Because you do not need saving. You are a 30-year-old woman who started a business on debt you couldn't afford, using a name that wasn't yours. You do not need a bailout. You need to learn what the word consequence means." I turned to Richard. "And you?" I said, "You told me to go live in the streets. You told the entire family I was homeless. You tried to destroy my reputation so that when this loan inevitably collapsed, nobody would believe me. You weren't protecting the family. You were setting me up to take the fall." Richard set his jaw. He was cornered. But he was a lawyer. He was looking for an angle. "You cannot prove that." He snarled. "That is speculation. And as for the signature, I can argue implied agency. I can argue that you gave verbal authorization and are now recanting. It is your word against ours. And if you think a jury is going to convict a mother for trying to help her daughter, you are delusional. I will countersue you for misappropriation of a debt instrument. I will paint you as a predatory vulture who bought her own family's debt to torture them." He looked at Grant, a sneer forming on his lips. "Go ahead. Sue us. It will take years. And in the meantime, Skyla's reputation will be dragged through the mud just as much as ours." Grant sighed. He looked at me and gave a small nod. It was time for the final nail. "Mr. Stone," Grant said, "we anticipated you might take that route." Grant reached into his laptop bag and pulled out a small flash drive. He placed it gently on the table. "We have a recording." Grant said. Richard froze. "What recording?" "It was taken yesterday," Grant said. "In your kitchen. It captures a conversation between you and your wife regarding the loan." Grant tapped a key on his laptop, which was connected to the room's speaker system. Richard's voice filled the room, loud and clear. "She will not sue. Marianne. She does not have the stomach for court." Then Marianne's voice, cold and calculating. "I am not worried about her suing. We just have to hold the line. After 2 months, it is too late for her to complain. She isn't going to send her own mother to jail." Grant hit the stop button. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. It was the silence of a tomb. Richard stared at the speaker, his mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He knew, as a lawyer, he knew exactly what that meant. It proved intent. It proved knowledge of guilt. It proved that there was no implied agency. It was a confession. "And we also have the email logs," Grant added, sliding one last piece of paper across the table. "The emails where Brielle told the loan officer that Skyla had anxiety and couldn't come to the bank. It destroys your narrative that Skyla was involved." Grant leaned back. "So, Mr. Stone, you can sue us, you can claim implied agency, and we will play that recording for the judge, the jury, and the state ethics board that governs your law license." Richard slumped back in his chair. The fight went out of him like air leaving a balloon. He looked old. He looked defeated. He looked at Marianne, who was weeping silently into her napkin. "What do you want?" Richard whispered. I sat back down at the head of the table. "I want this over," I said. Grant opened the first binder, the civil file. "We have prepared a settlement agreement," Grant said. It offers you two choices. He held up one finger. Choice 1, Rivergate Holdings exercises its right to immediate foreclosure. We seize the inventory, the equipment, and the leasehold. We liquidate everything to satisfy the debt. We also file the criminal report for fraud and forgery against all three of you. Marianne let out a sob. Grant held up a second finger. Choice 2. You sign a voluntary surrender of collateral. You turn over the keys to the studio to Rivergate Holdings within 72 hours. You sign a confession of judgment regarding the debt, admitting to the forgery. In exchange, Rivergate agrees not to file criminal charges, provided the debt is satisfied through the liquidation of the business assets. And there is one more condition, I added. I looked at all of them. You will sign a non-disparagement agreement. You will retract the lies you told the church and the family about me being homeless. You will write a letter, approved by my attorney, stating that Skyla Stone is a successful business owner who attempted to assist the family, and that any rumors to the contrary were false. Richard looked at the papers. Surrender the studio, he asked weakly. But that is Brielle's entire life. No, I said, that is the life you stole for her. It is gone. The only question now is whether you want to lose the studio or lose your freedom. Brielle looked at me, her eyes pleading. Skyla, please, you cannot take the studio. It is my dream. You should have dreamed cheaper. I said. I looked at the clock on the wall. You have 72 hours. I said, that is 3 days. I stood up. I did not wait for them to answer. I did not wait for them to beg. This is not a negotiation. I said, this is an eviction notice. I walked to the door. Grant began packing up the binders. And one last thing, I said, turning back to look at them huddled around the table. Do not think I am doing this to win. I already won. I won the day I left your house 10 years ago. I am doing this so that you never, ever think you can use my name as a shield again. From now on, I said, my voice hard as diamonds, I am not your daughter. I am not your sister. I am your creditor, and I expect to be paid. I opened the door and walked out into the cool night air of the corridor. I could hear Brielle sobbing behind me, a sound of utter despair, but as I walked toward the exit, I did not feel guilt. I felt lighter. I felt like a heavy coat had finally been taken off my shoulders. I walked past Caleb, who was standing in the hallway, looking pale. He nodded to me, a look of respect, and perhaps a little fear. I nodded back. It was done. The truth was on the table, stamped, recorded, and undeniable. Now, all that was left was to watch the house of cards fall. The 72 hours following the dinner at Juniper and Oak were the quietest 3 days of my life. I expected a barrage of phone calls. I expected Richard to scream into my voicemail, threatening to sue me for everything from elder abuse to emotional distress. I expected Brielle to show up at my building, demanding to be let in so she could scream at me in person, but there was nothing. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. It was the silence of people who had finally realized that the walls were not just closing in, they were already crushed. My phone did light up occasionally, but the messages were pathetic, disjointed attempts to test the waters. Skyla, we should talk without the lawyers. Richard texted on Friday morning. Please just answer the phone. Brielle sent on Friday night. I did not reply. I sat in my office at Lumen Grid, watching the code for a new shipping protocol scroll across my monitor, but my mind was entirely focused on the clock ticking down. I had given them a deadline, Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. If the papers were not signed by then, Grant Holloway would file the criminal complaints on Monday morning. On Saturday afternoon, the silence broke in a way I had not anticipated. My concierge called up to my unit. Ms. Stone, there is a Mrs. Marianne Stone in the lobby. She says she is your mother. She says it is urgent. I hesitated. My first instinct was to tell him to send her away, but curiosity, cold and sharp, got the better of me. I wanted to see what card she had left to play. Send her up, I said. When Marianne stepped off the elevator, she looked 10 years older than she had at the restaurant. Her perfect hair was slightly flat, her makeup applied with a shaking hand. She held her purse tight against her stomach like a shield. I did not offer her a drink. I did not invite her to sit on the Italian leather sofa. I stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed, waiting. I am not here to fight. Skyla, she said, her voice trembling. Then why are you here? I asked. The deadline is tomorrow. Marianne looked around my apartment. She took in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern art, the undeniable evidence of a wealth she could not comprehend. We can fix this, she said softly. We do not need the lawyers. We do not need the police. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. It was old, yellowed at the edges. This is the deed to the beach house, she said, placing it on the marble counter. And my jewelry, the pearls, the diamond brooch your grandmother left me. I want you to have them. I stared at the papers. The beach house was a small, dilapidated cottage on the coast that Richard had leveraged and refinanced 3 times. The jewelry was valuable sentimentally, perhaps, but financially it was negligible compared to the debt they owed me. What is this? Marianne, I asked. It is your inheritance, she whispered. I am giving it to you now, all of it. In exchange for dropping this, just let the loan go. Write it off as a loss. You have so much money. Skyla, you will not even miss it. Take the house, take the jewelry, and let your sister keep the studio. I looked at her, and I felt a wave of nausea. She was trying to bribe me. She was trying to buy my silence with the scraps of the family estate. She truly believed that everything in life was a transaction, that even justice could be bartered for a few strings of pearls and a mortgaged cottage. You think this is about money, I said, pushing the deed back toward her. You still do not get it. It is about family, she cried, tears welling in her eyes. I am trying to keep this family together. I said, you are trying to buy a clean conscience. You are trying to pay me off, so you do not have to admit that you committed a crime against your own daughter. I picked up the deed and held it out to her. I do not want the house, Marianne. I do not want the jewelry. I do not want anything that comes from you. I earned $25 million last year. I can buy the entire coastline if I want to. I do not need your handouts. She stared at me, the paper trembling in her hand. Then what do you want? She whispered. I want the truth, I said. And since you cannot give me that willingly, I am going to extract it legally. Go home. I will see you at Grant's office tomorrow. She left, defeated, clutching her useless bribe. Sunday morning brought a text from Caleb. It is over, he wrote. The suppliers came for the machines yesterday. Brielle tried to stop them, but they had the lien paperwork. She is a wreck. She finally told Richard she wants to sign. She says she cannot take the fear anymore. I felt a grim satisfaction. The pressure had worked. At 5 o'clock on Sunday, I walked into Grant Holloway's office. It was a stark contrast to the restaurant. There was no food, no mood lighting, no pretense of social niceties. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The conference table was bare except for 5 stacks of documents, each flagged with "Sign Here" stickers. My family was already there. They sat in a row on one side of the table, looking like prisoners awaiting sentencing. Richard was slumped in his chair, staring at his hands. Marianne was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Brielle looked hollow, as if the last 3 days had scooped everything inside her out. Grant sat at the head of the table. He nodded to me as I entered. I took the seat opposite them. I did not say hello. Let us proceed, Grant said. He pushed the first document toward Brielle. This is the confession of judgment, Grant explained. By signing this, you admit that the signature on the loan documents dated October 14th, 2022, was not Skyla Stone's signature. You admit that you had knowledge of this fact and benefited from the fraud. Brielle looked at the paper. Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I just needed the money, and Mom said she would handle it. Stop, I said. Brielle looked up at me. Do not blame Mom. I said, you are 30 years old. You saw the loan documents. You saw my name. You knew I wasn't there. You knew I didn't sign it. You let it happen because it was convenient for you. You were happy to use my credit as long as it bought you your dream." Brielle dropped her head. Tears dripped onto the mahogany table. "I am sorry," she choked out. "I did not offer forgiveness. I just pointed to the signature line. Sign it." She signed. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the room. Grant took the paper and slid the next document toward Richard and Marianne. "This is the voluntary surrender of collateral and the release of liability," Grant said. "This transfers all assets of Brielle and Company Bridal to Rivergate Holdings LLC for immediate liquidation. It also includes a clause where you, Richard and Marianne Stone, admit to facilitating the unauthorized use of Skyla Stone's identity." Richard looked up. His eyes were dull. "We did it for the family. Skyla," he croaked, "you have to understand. We were just trying to help your sister." Grant cut in, his voice like a whip. "Mr. Stone, I will remind you that, for the family, is not a legal defense against fraud. If you utter that phrase one more time, I will recommend my client withdraw this settlement offer and proceed with the criminal filing." Richard closed his mouth. He looked at the document. He looked at me. "You are ruining us," he said bitterly. "No," I said, "I am letting you ruin yourselves. I am just refusing to pay the bill." Richard signed. He pressed the pen down so hard the paper nearly tore. Marianne signed next, weeping silently the entire time. Grant gathered the papers. Then, he pulled out the final document, a single sheet of paper. "This is the retraction and apology," Grant said. He slid it toward Marianne. "You will sign this," I said, "and then you will make copies. You will send one to the pastor of Grace Community Church. You will send one to the head of the prayer circle. And you will post the text on your social media accounts for 30 days. Marianne read the paper. Her face went white. I, Marianne Stone, formally retract my previous statements regarding my daughter, Skyla Stone. The rumors that she is homeless, destitute, or financially unstable were false. Skyla is a successful business owner who attempted to assist our family. Any financial difficulties currently facing the Stone family are of our own making. I cannot do this, Marianne whispered. The church, the neighbors. They will think I am a liar. You are a liar, Marianne. I said. I leaned across the table. You were happy to destroy my reputation to cover your crime. You told the world I was a failure so they wouldn't suspect you were a thief. Now, you are going to tell them the truth. But the humiliation, she pleaded, is the price of your freedom. I finished. Sign it. Or I call the district attorney in the morning. Marianne looked at Richard. He turned his face away. He could not save her. With a trembling hand, she signed the paper. She was sobbing openly now, mourning the death of her perfect public image. It was done. Grant gathered the files into his briefcase. He checked the signatures one last time. Everything appears to be in order, Grant said. Rivergate Holdings will take possession of the studio keys immediately. The liquidation team arrives tomorrow morning at 8. I suggest you remove any personal items before then. I stood up. My family remained seated, broken and small. They looked like strangers to me now. The bond was not just severed, it was cauterized. I walked to the door. Skyla Brielle called out. Her voice was thin and desperate. I stopped. My hand on the doorknob. What happens now? She asked. What do we do? I did not turn around. You figure it out, I said, like I did. I walked out of the office and down the long corridor to the elevators. I stepped out of the building and into the cold night air of Charlotte. The wind bit at my face, but it felt clean. It felt real. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the family group chat, the chat where they had planned their dinners, shared their photos of Brielle, and ignored my existence until they needed a victim. I typed one final message. From this moment on, my name is not a resource you are authorized to use. Do not contact me. Do not speak about me. We are done. I hit send. Then, I went to the settings. I selected Leave Group. I selected Block Contact for Richard, for Marianne, for Brielle. I put the phone back in my pocket. I looked up at the skyline. at the lights of the city where I had built an empire from nothing. I was alone. Yes, but for the first time in 34 years, I was safe. I walked toward my car, the sound of my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me but a bad investment I had finally written off. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing Skyla take back her power, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.